Okay, so we've looked at funding databases and we've looked at some of the best resources that are out there to support you in the early stages of setting up and running your not-for-profit organisation. Now, most of us running not-for-profit organisations are doing it by ourselves or with a very small team, and often at the beginning we're doing it on a voluntary basis. So it's unlikely that you can make fundraising your full-time job, but yet it is very important if you're going down the route of trying to secure some of your income through grants. So in this video, I'm going to focus on trying to assess how we best spend our time most effectively when it comes to fundraising, and how we can speed up that process of getting to some positive results and bringing some money into the organisation. And to do that, we're going to take our long list of information and funders and resources and condense them down into a workable shortlist. Here are some of the ways that you can determine whether a funder is a really good match for your organisation or your cause. Do the funder's aims and objectives match yours? For some of the larger funders, this can be quite easy to determine by looking at their website. Of course, it helps to be really clear on what your own aims and objectives are. Now, really, we're looking for funders who fund a particular cause or a particular type of organisation or a particular community or beneficiary group. I'll go into this in a bit more detail later. But first off, you need to be able to identify some similarities between what you do and what the funder wants to support. So find something that gives you some evidence that they like to support your type of organisation delivering what you deliver in the area that you deliver it in. Which brings me on to the next one. Do they cover the geographical area that you're in? In the earlier video when I showed you on the Charity Commission how you can check that a funder supports organisations in a particular area, like a region or even a city. And again, the larger funders or those with their own websites will state on there which areas they cover. But you'd be surprised how many people will apply to funders who state that they fund in one area and not another, thinking that they could be the exception to that rule. I'm not saying that that never happens, but really, if you're short of time, you're best spending that time applying to funders who focus on that geographical area. And like I said when we were looking at the funding databases, you will eventually build up to applying for national funders, but at least at first, try some local funders where there'll be less competition and you know that they're aware of the issues in your area. So thinking about the geographical area is key to making sure that you prioritise those funders who are most likely to be interested in what you do. Are they actually accepting applications? And this isn't just as simple as whether the fund is currently open or closed. If they have funding rounds, that will be evident on their website or wherever they post information about their grant rounds. Some trusts and foundations will happily accept unsolicited applications, meaning that you can write to them without being invited to do so. But increasingly, trusts and foundations, because they're inundated with requests for funding and they themselves run on a very, very small team, quite often they will say, we don't accept any unsolicited applications. We'd rather you didn't write to us unless you've been invited to do so. Again, it's not always easy to find out that information, but if a funder has asked that you don't apply, then don't apply. It's very unlikely you'll be the exception in these cases. Sometimes the best thing to do is to try and make that funder aware of you. If they don't accept unsolicited applications, what I sometimes recommend is you just send a letter of introduction. You're not asking for anything, you're just letting them know who you are, what you do, where you're based, and if they're interested, they will contact you and ask for more. Have they funded similar projects or groups to yours? So again, when we went into the Charity Commission website, I showed you how to find the list of previous grant recipients for any trust and foundation, any charitable trust. And as I said, by law, they have to list those somewhere. Sometimes they will list them on their website. They will link to a spreadsheet, for example, where they list all their previous funders. Quite often some of the larger funders will list some case studies on their website, so you can get a bit of an idea of the types of projects that they like to fund. Otherwise, as I said, the Charity Commission is a great resource. If you download the last set of accounts, you'll see there a list of their previous grant recipients, and that's a really good resource in terms of working out whether they would fund an organisation like yours. Is your organisation eligible to apply? So a lot of the funding databases that we looked at will list out the eligibility criteria. They'll list out the types of organisations that they'll fund. So there are still many more funders who will fund types of registered charities as opposed to community interest companies, for example. So it's always worth checking if you are a community interest company or a charitable company or something like that, to check that they will fund those types of organisations. The other thing to have a look at is the type of expenditure that they will pay for. So many smaller charitable trusts, many smaller funders will not pay for staff costs, for example, or they won't pay for capital expenditure. They won't pay for any kind of buildings or renovation costs. They will only fund ongoing costs of delivery, venue hire, volunteer expenses, things like that. Always have a good study of that list of what they'll pay for and the exclusions, the things that they won't pay for, before you put your costs together for what you're applying for. And how long does it take from submitting your application to finding out the result? So it's really important to know this if you're trying to plan out a project. Say you want to start a project in 3 months' time, but you wouldn't hear the outcome for the funding that you're applying for 4 or 5 months. That's not going to work, because remember that most funders will not fund anything retrospectively, so you can't spend any of the money until it's actually sitting in your bank account. Some funders like the lottery and larger charitable foundations will give you a really good indication of their turnaround times, and this can be anything from 4 to 6 weeks to 12 weeks, which is very common, to much longer lead-in times. If nothing is stated, and particularly for those smaller trusts and foundations that you might be looking at, quite often their trustees who assess the applications that have come in, they might only meet 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes you can find that information out from their annual report as well. But if you can't find that information anywhere, the best thing to do is allow a 6-month turnaround time. And I know that sounds like a long time, but if you're applying to a charitable trust or foundation, apply a good 6 months in advance of when you would need that money to start your project. So let's say now that you've identified a funder that you want to apply to. What might you need to know about that funder in order to go forward with your application to them? So you'll need to know whether they have an application form that you need to complete, whether this is online or written, and if they don't have an application form, how they want you to send them that information. Now, if it's an online application form, that's easy in many ways, because they'll give you the questions, they'll give you a word count, and usually for those I recommend that you copy the questions into a separate document and work on those answers offline rather than directly in the online application form. Sometimes, however, they don't give you anything at all. They might simply say your application should be a maximum of 2 sides of A4 or 4 sides of A4 as an example. And sometimes they'll say, send us a written proposal covering these points, and they'll give you a list of questions or headings that they want you to cover. But the bottom line is this differs from funder to funder. So that's the first bit of information you need to find out. How much can you apply for? And what is the average grant? Again, some funders will have their own website, they'll have all this information there, how much you can apply for, whether there's a range of funding you can apply for or whether there's just a maximum. And if they don't have that, again, you can gather that information from their annual report on the Charity Commission, trying to work out an average of the previous grants that they've given. And if you can't find that information anywhere or you're really not clear, I would recommend sending them an inquiry initially saying, what's your average grant? What would you recommend we apply for? Because what you don't want is to be way out of the ballpark. If most of their grants are under £5,000 and you apply for 50, they're not going to say, well, we only give grants under 5,000, we're going to give you 5,000 instead. They're going to think you haven't done your research and just dismiss your application out of hand. So it's really worth doing that research into the levels of grants that they give. Is there a deadline? So many funders will have funding rounds throughout the year with set deadlines that you need to meet. Other trusts will allow you to send in your application at any point, but they will still have dates when their trustees meet to assess applications. They might email you or write to you and let you know at which meeting date your application will be assessed. But having an idea of those deadlines is a great way of managing your workload and prioritising which funders to go for in which order. And how do you submit your application? So increasingly it's an online application form now, and even then you quite often have to attach some supporting documents as well. A few times I've seen where you submit your application online, but you then need to forward printed copies of things like your accounts or other supporting documents. And there are still many trusts and foundations that want everything printed out and posted. So again, be aware of how they want you to submit your application. And then finally, do they have any other requirements? So if they want you to send anything else, they will usually ask for it. If they want other information about your trustees, your board, your accounts, they will ask for that. And I'll go into this a little bit later in terms of supporting documents and how to pull all of those together. But just be aware at this stage of what they're asking you for and what they're not asking you for. So if they don't ask for any additional information, and they say a maximum of 2 pages of A4, don't also send them your leaflets and your printed materials and a free pen and everything. Just send them the 2 pages because that's all they want. So what I'd like you to do now is to go back to that long list of potential funders that you initially researched and try and condense that down to about 5. So you're looking for 5 funders that you're eligible to apply for, they're open for applications, they like the kind of thing that you do, you feel like there's a really good fit, and you have enough information on the application process to be able to start working on your application straight away. So there's space in the workbook for you to do that. And make sure you note down some details there. So I usually do this on a separate spreadsheet where I list the name of the funder, what they fund, the grant size, the kind of range or average of grants that they will give out, and how to apply and any deadlines. So once you've got that short list of funders, the next video will guide you through how to increase your success of that first bid.